Tub of Stories. My name is Melinda and I am here to do my February wrap-up. This video is going out a little later than I had planned. I had filmed a video, which was my February wrap-up and my weekly reading update last weekend, and then something was wrong with the file and it was corrupted or something, but I couldn't get it to upload. So I just trashed it and we're doing this over. I'm not gonna do my weekly reading update here. I'll do that again this weekend, but I am gonna cover February. But before I get to that, I wanted to give you one little update. If you'd seen my video about banned books, and I'm gonna put a card up for it, I'm not sure which side it's gonna go to, that my daughter and I are having a project where we wanna send banned books, middle grade, young adult, picture books, or maybe classics that are used in high schools that have been banned. We'd like to send some copies to little free libraries in states that are going through bannings right now. And I wanted to give an update on that. I am sending off 3 boxes of books tomorrow to different parts of the country. Between 3 and 5 books in each one. Is that about right? Yeah, that's about right. And I'm gonna keep doing this. I think I only have 1 book left in my stash right now, so I am gonna be scouring like the library bookstore and the library book sales for copies that I can find, and I will take donations from friends and such who want to get rid of some books that they might have. One thing I'm not going to be doing is I am not going to be taking books out of little free libraries around here to send them off, because kids here need them too. But anyway, I wanted to give you an update on that. Please check out that video. I'll put a form if you'd like to participate on there. I'm happy to do it. I will tell you though, it's probably gonna take me a little while before I send more books out, because as I said, my stash is down to 1 book at the moment. I've sent the rest off. So anyhow, oh, and one more thing. I'm using a hashtag for that. If people, and I've talked to the people who are getting the books, and they'll use that hashtag, and the hashtag is beat back the bans. So if you'd like to do something like this, you want to put some banned books into Little Free Library and then show on social media that you did this, I encourage you to do that, even if it's in your area and you're not in one of those states. But then if you want to put on social media, use the beat back the bans hashtag. It'll be easier to find it and give each other little high fives, virtual high fives for it. Okay. So February ended up being actually a really good reading month for me, better than I had expected. It is a shorter month, so I expected fewer books. Plus it was kind of a weird month with different things going on in our family and snowstorms and all that. But I ended up finishing 13 books this month, which was really good. And as I've said before, my goal is always 12 books a month, so I'm still ahead on that. My average rating for those books was 3.8. And as I've said before, I actually give letter grades, but they correspond to stars, and it's a whole thing. Anyway, a 3.8 is about like an A-, B+-ish sort of grade, so that's really good. And of those 13 books, 11 were fiction and 2 were nonfiction. Let's see what else. 8 of them were in print, 4 were on ebook, and 1 was in audio. I usually do most of my audiobook listening at the gym, and because February was so crazy, I didn't go to the gym as much. And so that 5-hour audiobook took me an entire month to get through. So usually I do a little bit better on audio than that. And now as for genres, I had 5 mystery novels, 2 memoir novels, 2 that I labeled general fiction, which is sort of a catch-all for things that don't really fit in other categories, at least not very cleanly. 2 historical fictions, 1 thriller, and 1 romance. And let's see what else. Oh, the monetary value of books that I spent. That means how much I paid for the books that I read this month, not how much I spent on books this month, but how much I paid for the books that I actually did read that I owned. This month was $98.53. Now in a previous video, let me tell you what my TBR numbers are. In previous video, I talked about my TBR intervention. Put a card up for that too, that my TBR is out of control. Again, I am not counting audiobooks in this, but as of the end of the month, my owned print TBR was 164 books, and my owned ebook TBR was 650. Now, that 650 is going to be greatly reduced next month. Not because I'm going on an ebook reading spree, but I've been trying to catalog my books, and on my Kindle, I realized I have a lot of books that I kind of got when I first got a Kindle, like over 10 years ago, that were like free or really cheap or whatever, and I have no interest in reading them now. And even though they don't take up any physical space, I don't want to be bothered with them. I don't want them in my mental space. So I'm going to unhaul those virtually. So I'm going to have a major ebook unhaul between now and the end of the month. So we'll have very different numbers next month. And as I've also said with my TBR intervention, as far as purchasing new books, I can purchase half the number of owned print or ebooks that I read the previous month. So of the 13 books, well, actually 12 books, because one was an audiobook. Of the 12 books that I read this month, 8 of them were ones that I owned. That means that I could buy up to 4 books in the month of March. It's March 8th, I've bought 2, but that's one of them's my book of the month one. So we'll see. And I actually don't have any plans to buy any more, so it might just stay at 2 for the rest of the month. But anyway, so let's get down to the books. I'm going to start with, I had one DNF, and that was The End of Drum Time by Hanna Pylväinen. I hope that's how you pronounce it. It looks like it's a Swedish or Finnish name. So I DNF'd this because I was having trouble reading it. Not reading it because of the language or anything like that, but actually reading it. As I've said before, I have some eye issues, and one thing that it can be hard to read is when the print is very small and not very dark on the page, or if it's on a yellowed page. And this one had small, not very dark print. So I had a lot of trouble actually reading it. So I did a soft DNF, returned it to the library with plans to put it back on my TBR and then do an ebook or an audiobook version of it. And it's still there, but I've heard from other people who've attempted this book they found it rather dull. So it's on my sort of grand TBR, the one that has everything, not just the books I own. It's there for the moment. I don't know if it's going to stay on there. It's not a priority book for me to get back to, but I'm not against getting back to it. And then I had one book that was not rated, and that was The Scandalous Sisterhood of Prickwillow Place by Julie Berry. As I explained before, this book is a middle grade book that was from my daughter's collection. In reading it, there were some things about it that kind of like sat wrong with me, but it's because I'm not the target audience for that book. So I didn't feel it was appropriate for me to rate it at that point. So I've given the book back to my daughter. She's actually not read it yet, but I'm going to have her read it, and then we're going to talk about it, and then kind of between the two of us, we'll come up with a rating. So on to my rated books. I had 3 books to which I gave a B, and a B is 3 stars if you look on Goodreads. And a B is good. These ratings kind of, some books a B is really good, some books a B is a disappointment. It just depends. But these are the 3 that I gave a B to. Lemon by Kwon Yeo-Sun, which is a book in translation. It's translated from the Korean. This is a mystery, and I honestly think that my issue with this book, like it probably could have been an A book, if I were more familiar with kind of how Korean literature, what the styles of Korean literature, contemporary Korean literature are, and some more cultural things about South Korea. Because I didn't have that background knowledge, it was hard for me to settle into this book. So while I gave it a B, and I think it probably, other people, I can understand why people would really enjoy this book, especially if they're more familiar with that. For me, it was a B, but a B is not bad. And then the next book, now here's a case where B is a little bit of a disappointment, and that is You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty by Akwaeke Emezi. The reason I say this is a little bit of a disappointment is because so many people said this book just blew their minds and was so wonderful. And there are really great things about this book. The writing is absolutely amazing. Emezi does a fantastic job of creating the world and really giving you the sensory details of everything that's going around. For the most part, the characters are just really, they're really well crafted and realistic. They almost have real flesh and blood on them. However, my problem with this book is that there was one character in particular, and I'm not going to go into any great detail because I don't want to a spoiler tag here, and this might be considered a spoiler. But I will just say this one particular character was not very realistic, but it wasn't very realistic in that Emezi just didn't write a very realistic character, and maybe they didn't succeed on that point. That wasn't the case. The character was written in a way that they seemed very otherworldly and very unrealistic. Like that was a very intentional choice on Emezi's part. And I think if the story had gone a different direction, that could be a very effective device that they used. But the way the story went with this character, it kind of knocked down the house of cards. It just was the thing that sort of made this story not work for me personally. So, well, I did give it a B. Again, a B is good. This is where a B is a little bit of a disappointment for me. And then the third book I gave a B to is one that I actually changed the rating on. I originally gave this an A, or 4 stars, and it's Take My Hand by Dolen Perkins-Valdez. And here's the reason why I changed the rating. This was a book club book for me. And in my book club, at that discussion, we had 2 doctors and 1 lawyer. And if you've ever read this book, there's a medical component to it and there's a legal component to it. And in the discussion that we had, I became aware of things that were very inaccurate with what she depicted on there in those fields, especially in the medical field. And I felt like that probably was a bit of a disservice. I do feel she could have written the book in a different way that wouldn't have had those inaccuracies. So after that discussion, well, I still enjoyed the book and I probably would still recommend it. I think it's a very important story. I didn't feel it was an A-worthy book, so I took it down to a B. I had one book that I gave a B+, or 3.5 stars, or if you go on Goodreads, I round up, so it would be 4 stars. But it's a 3.5 star or a B+ book. And this is a case where that's a really good grade. And that is Death Comes to Marlow by Robert Thorogood. This is the second book in the Marlow Murder Club series. I really enjoyed it. It's a fun, I'm not a cozy mystery person. I think this book is this series is turning me into a cozy mystery person. It's a lot like this kind of quirky British television dramas, which is not surprising because Robert Thorogood writes those. But I really enjoyed this. I didn't enjoy it as much as the first one. That doesn't mean it's a bad book, but I gave the first one 4 stars or an A, so I'm giving this one a B+, just out of comparison. But that is Death Comes to Marlow by Robert Thorogood. And now we get to the books that I gave an A to, and these are 4-star books. So I have 6 of those. And the first one is Beautiful Country by Qian Julie Wang. This is a memoir about a young woman who came as a child to the United States from China, I believe in 1994, and lived as an undocumented person with her parents in New York City. I believe they lived in Brooklyn. And this is her growing up. I really enjoyed this book. It's a hard book at times. It's a very honest book. Qian Julie Wang is a very good memoirist. There's a trap that memoirs sometimes fall into where the writer has as I like to say, they're the hero of their own story, which obviously they're a memoir, so that makes sense. But what I mean by that is they personally do nothing wrong. They don't take responsibility when they may have done something, and they don't take responsibility for it because they're the hero of their own story, if that makes any sense. She does not fall into that trap. She is very honest that she was sometimes a bratty child. She's very honest about maybe the missteps she made or the misconceptions she had, and I really appreciated it. The reason I would have given this a 4.5 rating, and this is something I might go back and change in the future to a 4.5, but the reason I didn't is because this feels like it's book 1 of 2. And it ends in a very natural place for it to end, but you really are left feeling there's more to the story. If Wang were to come out with another book, which she has not, I saw an interview with her. She says she's working on a novel. She doesn't want to work on a memoir right now because writing this was so hard on her parents, which I understand, that's fine. But I don't think she has said she's not going to write another memoir. But if she were, I may go back and change this to a 4.5. That was my only issue with it. And I don't even know if that was an issue. That was 4 stars for me. So the next one was the 6th book in the Ruth Galloway series by Elly Griffiths, and it's called The Outcast Dead. If you've been watching this channel, you know I enjoy this series. It's sort of my priority series right now. The final book in the series, or at least the final for now book in the series, I guess has just been released in the UK. It hasn't come out in the US quite yet. But it's sort of because the series is coming to an end, it's kind of pushing me to read through this series. So it is a priority series for me. And I really liked this one. This particular one had a sense of urgency and a sense of dread that I don't usually find in the Ruth Galloway ones. And I think it's because this book deals with child abduction. And as a parent, that's a horrible thing. That's a scary thing. And so I think Elly Griffiths did a really good job of drawing those emotions out of the reader. So I really enjoyed this one. Normally I give series books like this 3.5. So the fact that this was an A book or a 4-star book is saying something. And my next 4-star book was Better the Blood by Michael Bennett. I have talked about this one before. I really enjoyed this one. It is a thriller, and it is very much in that genre. And it is about Maori, and I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. I mean, I've heard it Mari or Maori. I've always said Maori. I'm sorry if that's incorrect, but I'm doing the best I can. But she's a Maori detective in Auckland, New Zealand. The author is also Maori. And she's on the trail of a serial killer. And it deals a lot with how Maori in modern New Zealand deal with their own heritage and how it has been treated by the people who came to New Zealand. I really enjoyed this one. It is the first in a series, so you don't have to read anything before it. And apparently the series is also going to be turned into a television drama. The author got his start writing television. I don't know if it's ever going to be available in the US. It hasn't started yet. I don't know what the timeline is on it. I don't know if it's going to be available in the US, but I would hope it is because this is something that I'd like to watch. And that's Better the Blood by Michael Bennett. And then the next book was my audiobook that was about 5 hours long and took me an entire month to listen to, which is not a reflection at all on the audiobook. And it was You'll Never Believe What Happened to Lacey by Amber Ruffin and Lacey Lamar. Amber Ruffin is a comedian and comedy writer. They both narrated this as well. You can tell that Amber Ruffin did most of the writing and most of the narrating, which is fine, but these are stories from Lacey's life. Lacey is her sister, still lives in Omaha, Nebraska, and has to deal with racism on a level that her sister who now lives in New York City does not. And these stories are outrageous, and they're kind of terrifying if you think about it. Like, these things are still happening because they are so awful, but they're told in such a way that you're like, oh my God, that's awful. You know, there's a lot of humor in this book. And honestly, I don't think you could tell these stories without there being humor. I really enjoyed this one. For my Libro credit this month, I got their second book, which just came out, which is the World Book Records of Racist Stories or something like that, which I think is very much more of the same. And I'm here for it. The one thing I'll say about this book is I recommend the audiobook, but I also recommend going to the library and getting a print copy as well, because there are pictures in it. They refer to the pictures, they tell you what to look for, and it's nice to be able to see that. You normally wouldn't be able to see that in an audiobook. So it's nice to have a print copy to look at that. And the next 4-star book I have is one that I completely forgot. It was earlier on my list. I'm sorry about that. And that is The Nickel Boys by Colson Whitehead. I was very apprehensive about this book. I picked it up at a library book sale for like $1. But I had a bad experience with the Underground Railroad. It just was a book that didn't work for me. I had trouble following the narrative. I had trouble following what was going on. And that could be for any multitude of reasons. So I had just kind of decided that Colson Whitehead was not a book for me. It was not an author for me. But I got this book and I had drawn it out of the box. So it was in my TBR basket. And I thought, it's Black History Month. I'm going to give it a try. And this worked for me. This book just really worked for me. It is not an enjoyable book by any realm of the imagination. This book is horrible in a lot of ways. Horrible, the subject matter is horrible. It's set in a reform school in Florida in the 1960s. But it's so well written. And I understand finally what it is about Colson Whitehead. I do think that he's kind of an author who you never know what you're going to get. He's very versatile. So each book is very different from the other, kind of like Kazuo Ishiguro. But now I'm open to reading more Colson Whitehead, which is good because I have Harlem Shuffle on my Kobo. I may even go back and give the Underground Railroad a try. It might have been the wrong time for me to read it. I don't know when I'll do that, but this one convinced me that Colson Whitehead is worth the hype. So I gave this 4 stars, and it's The Nickel Boys. And my final A book, a grade A book, was the Sittaford Mystery by Agatha Christie. This is a standalone, so it's not a Marple or a Perot or any of her other detectives. It's one I didn't know much about, but it's actually pretty fun. I have started listening to a new Agatha Christie podcast called Tea and Murder, which I highly recommend if you like Agatha Christie. It's a fun podcast. But the host of the podcast says she does not like plucky characters, and she doesn't like this book. I do like plucky characters, and I do like this book, and it's the plucky character who makes it worth it. She's really a lot of fun to read. Her name is Emily Trefusis. I didn't suspect the ending, so that's always a good thing. I just really enjoyed this one. So grade A for the Sittaford Mystery by Agatha Christie. So this month I didn't have any A+ books. I normally only grade up to an A+, which is 4.5. I reserve 5 stars for books that blow me away, that kind of blow everything out of the water. And I don't give 5 stars very often. In 2022, I gave 9 5-star books, and that is a high number. This month, however, I gave 2 5-star books, and I think they're both really earned. Both of these books really surprised me in their way, and they're also both local books. And I think that was really special, especially in the month of February. February is Oregon's my state, Oregon's birthday month, so it was fun to read some Oregon books. The first one, even more surprising, is it's a short story collection. As you know, I almost always give short story collections 4 stars, but this one got 5, or an A+, or more than an A+, a best ever. And that's The Beadworkers by Beth Piatote. I don't know how to say her name. That's Piatote. She is a Nez Perce. She's a member of the Nez Perce tribe. I don't think she's actually from Oregon. I think she's from Idaho. I know the Nez Perce Reservation spans both states. She now lives and teaches in California. But these stories, if you can tell from the cover, that is Portland, Oregon in the background. Almost all these stories take place in this area, in Oregon. One takes place actually near where my husband grew up. And it involves the indigenous populations here in this part of the country in the Pacific Northwest. I try to read a lot of indigenous literature, and this is the first time I've read indigenous literature from the Pacific Northwest. Part of that is because, unfortunately, a lot of the indigenous tribes in this area were decimated by disease when the fur traders came before it was settled. It's colonized. But before the colonists came. So when the wagon trains got out to Oregon, there were not many indigenous people left at that time, and therefore they said there weren't any because, But there were and there are indigenous people in this area, and this book highlights their stories. One of the stories actually takes place in my hometown, which was really fun. And it's not just the indigenous aspect. This book, the stories in this book handle relationships beautifully. There's friendship, there's romantic, there's parental, just relationships are gorgeous in this. And of course, there's talk about heritage. It's also really interesting that this is a short story collection, but it's more of a multimedia almost collection because there's poetry, there is a play. The author, I'm just going to say the author because I don't want to slaughter her name again, and I'm very sorry about that. But she's not afraid to take chances. So I love this book, and it's hard to find, but I highly recommend it if you want to give it a try, and that is The Beadworkers. Now the next book, which I also gave 5 stars, all-time favorite, it sort of upended the way I talk about books, because it used to be, if someone asked me what my favorite book was, I would say, well, among classics, I really like Jane Eyre and I like Wuthering Heights. And then I really read this book that was really good. But if I were going to read a mystery, this would be my favorite. I don't say that anymore. Now, if someone were to ask me what my all-time favorite book is, it's this book. It's Mink River by Brian Doyle. Brian Doyle was a local author. He was actually born and raised in Brooklyn, but he married a woman from Oregon. And then he lived in Oregon for the rest of his life. He died 2015, I think, of cancer, but we'll still call him a local author. This book is set in a fictional town on the Oregon coast. if you've never been to the Oregon coast, you don't know what you're missing, because it is one of the most beautiful places on earth. It is the most beautiful, I think the most beautiful coastline in the country. I don't care what you say about Cape Cod. I've been to Cape Cod. It does not measure up to the Oregon coast. And it's set at a very specific time. They don't ever tell you when exactly it's set, but from context clues, you could figure out it's in the late 70s or early 80s. One of those context clues is that there's a character in there who's kind of, you know, he's about 60-ish, but they say that he fought in World War II. So that would put it in the 70s and 80s. But it's also set at a time when the industries on the Oregon coast, which were generally timber industry and fishing, were declining. Obviously, both industries still exist, but they are just a shadow of what they once were. So this is when it was really on its decline. And the current big industry on the Oregon coast, which is tourism, had not spread beyond a couple of larger towns on the coast. So it would not be in a small town like this one is set in. So this is a town that's in crisis. Also, it's set before the wine boom, which is important. They mentioned the wine boom at the end, but this is a town that's in crisis. It doesn't talk about it being in crisis, but it's about, you can tell that everyone, it addresses the lives of several people in this town, intertwined lives. Sometimes they're related, sometimes they just know each other. And it's about caring for others and helping people when they need it and being a community. This character right here, this is Moses. Moses is a talking crow, and not talking like parrots talk, like they just sort of like you train them to say phrases and they throw them out without any really cognition of what they're saying. No, Moses talks. And Moses is a very important character, so that should tell you something, that one of the major characters of this book is a talking crow. There is obviously elements of magical realism. There's elements of spiritualism, both Catholicism, Irish Catholicism, and indigenous spirituality that come together and they blend really well. The language in this book is breathtakingly beautiful. I was trying to describe this book to someone, and I'm talking about, like, you know, the pace, they just keep the pace going. Sometimes it goes fast and it's slow, it kind of ebbs and flows. And then it clicked in my mind, like a river. The prose is like a river in this book. It's not always the easiest book to read as far as just general facility with language, just because there are some very long sentences in this book, and there's lots of use of poetic language, but it's worth it. I loved this book. It is my all-time favorite book at this point. 5 stars. Amazing. Please try to find this book and give it a try. It could be hard to find if you just go into a bookstore, unless you're in the Pacific Northwest, because it is from a local, it's from the Oregon State University Press, but you can easily find it on bookshop.org, or an independent bookstore can order it for you. And a little footnote to this, as I said earlier, that I can buy up to 4 books this month, but I've already bought 2. The first one was my book of the month selection for this month, which was Lone Women by Victor LaValle. The second book was, when I was talking about this book in my book club, someone had mentioned there's a character in this book who has an ambiguous ending, let's just say. And we were kind of talking about, what do you think happened to this character? And someone in my book club piped up and they said, you know, I saw an interview with him and he wrote a sequel. And the sequel is this character with the ambiguous ending. So the second book I bought is that it's not a sequel, it's a companion to this book, which I need to go pick up at Powell's sometime. So maybe I'll do that tomorrow. So yeah. Anyway, Mink River by Brian Doyle. Please give it a try. It is so wonderful. And that's my February for you. Thank you so much. And next month for my March, what I'm going to try and do in March is, instead of doing like this, where I just sit and talk about everything I read, I'm going to try and do it more vlog style. We'll see how it goes. We're going to be out of town for part of the month, and so I figure that's kind of an easier way of doing it. But anyway, we'll see how it turns out. If it's just a mess, you're going to see another video like this. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me. Please give me a thumbs up, subscribe to my channel, and I will see you in the next video. Thank you.